The dust-covered letter trembled in Clara Thompson's hands as she read the cold, official words that would shatter her world. Her children were being taken by the Arizona Territory authorities. Tears blurred her vision as she sank to the floor of her modest riverside home, clutching the paper that claimed she was an unfit mother, all because she was a widow struggling to make ends meet in 1883. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking in the empty house that had once echoed with her children's laughter. "They can't take my babies, but they had." 8-year-old Samuel and 6-year-old Lily had been removed from school that very afternoon, whisked away to what the officials called proper care, while Clara had been tending to her laundry business. The letter explained that complaints had been lodged about the children's appearance, their occasional absences from school, and Clara's long working hours, all circumstances born of necessity, not neglect. Clara Thompson had been fighting an uphill battle since her husband died in a mining accident 2 years ago. At 28, she had transformed their home into a laundry business, washing the clothes of Riverside's more fortunate residents. The work was backbreaking, the pay meager, but it had kept food on the table and a roof over their heads until now. 3 days after her children were taken, Clara walked the dusty main street of Riverside, Arizona Territory, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, her normally neat brown hair escaping its pins. She was headed to see Judge Wilson again, the 4th time this week. Each visit had ended the same way, with polite dismissal and patronizing assurances that the territorial court would review her case in due time. As she approached the courthouse, a commotion at the saloon across the street caught her attention. A man stumbled out the swinging doors, pushed by a pair of rough-looking cowboys. "And stay out, Zachary," shouted one of them. "Your fancy words don't impress nobody here." The man called Zachary dusted himself off with surprising dignity. He was tall and lean, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. Unlike most men in Riverside, he wore a clean white shirt beneath his worn leather vest, and his dark hat seemed expensive despite its obvious age. Clara looked away quickly when he glanced in her direction, focusing instead on the courthouse steps ahead. She had no time for saloon brawls or strangers' troubles, not when her children were somewhere in Prescott, probably terrified without their mother. Inside the courthouse, the clerk barely looked up when she approached his desk. "Mrs. Thompson," he said flatly, "Judge Wilson is busy with important territorial matters. My children being taken from their mother without fair hearing is not important." Clara's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "It's been 3 days. I haven't even been told where exactly they are." "The judge has reviewed your situation," the clerk replied, still not meeting her eyes. "The children are wards of the territory now, in a proper home in Prescott. The hearing is scheduled for next month." "Next month," Clara gasped. "That's 4 weeks away. Please, I need to see my children. They must be so frightened." "Mrs. Thompson," came a stern voice from behind her. Judge Wilson stood in the doorway to his chambers, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and cold eyes. "Your continued disruptions are not helping your case. The welfare office has determined that your situation is unsuitable for children. You work excessive hours, leave them unattended, and cannot provide proper care." "That's not true," Clara fought to keep her composure. "I arrange for Mrs. Becker next door to watch them when I have deliveries. They're never alone. And they're only poorly dressed because they're growing children, and a proper mother would find a way to provide," the judge interrupted. "Perhaps this will motivate you to find a suitable husband who can support you all. Until then, the court's decision stands." The callous suggestion that she should simply replace her beloved husband Henry with any man willing to marry her struck Clara like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to protest further, but the judge had already turned away. "Good day, Mrs. Thompson," he said with finality. Clara stumbled back onto the street, her chest tight with panic and grief. A month. 4 long weeks without her children, without even knowing if they were safe or happy. The territorial orphanage in Prescott had a grim reputation. Some children were placed with families quickly, but others. "Excuse me, madam." Clara looked up, startled to find the man from the saloon Zachary standing before her. Up close, she could see his eyes were an unusual shade of blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. "I couldn't help overhearing some of your conversation in there," he said. "Sounds like you're getting the same treatment from Wilson that I got." Clara straightened her shoulders. "My troubles are my own, sir." "Zachary Irwin," he offered with a slight bow. "And sometimes troubles are better shared, especially when they involve Judge Wilson and his peculiar ideas of justice." Something in his tone made Clara pause. "You know the judge." "I know his type," Zachary replied. "Men who wield power without compassion tend to be similar wherever you go." He gestured toward the small cafe down the street. "Would you allow me to buy you a cup of coffee? You look like you could use a moment to collect yourself." Clara's first instinct was to refuse. She had no time for strange men or coffee. But exhaustion weighed heavily on her, and the prospect of returning to her empty home was suddenly unbearable. "Just coffee," she said cautiously. "I'm Clara Thompson." At the cafe, Clara found herself telling this stranger her story, how she'd come to Arizona Territory with Henry chasing silver dreams, how they'd settled in Riverside, where he found steady work in the mines, how they'd built a simple but happy life until the cave-in that killed him and 3 others. "The mine owner paid a pittance in compensation," she said bitterly. "Enough to bury Henry, but not enough to live on. So I started taking in laundry. It's honest work, Mr. Irwin." "Zach, please," he corrected gently. "And I don't doubt it's honest work, Mrs. Thompson. The question is why Judge Wilson seems so intent on punishing you for it." Clara's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "The Territorial Welfare Office says I neglect my children because they sometimes come to school in patched clothes, or because Samuel missed 3 days when he had fever last month." Her voice caught. "They claim I'm setting a poor example by working such long hours, that a proper mother would find a husband," Zach finished, his mouth twisted in disgust. "Wilson suggested the same to me, though in my case, it was that I should settle down if I wanted to be taken seriously." "Are you a drifter, Mr. Irwin?" Clara asked, suddenly wary. "A wanderer with purpose," he corrected with a slight smile. "I was a Pinkerton agent for 7 years. Now I work independently, investigating matters that local law sometimes prefers to ignore." Clara studied him with new interest. "You're a detective, of sorts." Zach's expression became serious. "Mrs. Thompson, I don't mean to pry, but is there anyone in town who might benefit from your misfortune? Someone who wants your property, perhaps, or has a personal grudge?" Clara thought for a moment. "My laundry business has been doing well enough lately. I took some customers from Mrs. Hargrove's Chinese laundry when her prices went up." She shook her head. "But surely that's not enough reason to take someone's children away." "You'd be surprised what petty jealousies can lead to," Zach said grimly. "Especially when combined with a judge who sees women as property rather than people." Their conversation was interrupted by the cafe owner bringing more coffee. When he moved away, Clara leaned forward. "Why were you at the courthouse today, Mr. Irwin?" A shadow crossed Zach's face. "I've been investigating some irregularities involving orphan children throughout the territory." cases where children seem to disappear from official records after being made wards of the territory. Clara felt her blood run cold. Disappear? You don't think? I don't know enough yet to make accusations, Zach said quickly, but I'm concerned by patterns I've seen. Judges in several towns have been particularly zealous about removing children from homes where the only apparent crime is poverty or a mother working to support her family. What can I do? Clara asked, fear and determination warring in her voice. I can't wait a month for a hearing that's probably already decided against me. Zach considered her for a long moment. I need to gather more evidence about what's happening, but in the meantime, we should prepare your case properly. The hearing may be a formality in Wilson's mind, but if we can bring enough public testimony about your character and care for your children, it might force his hand. We, Clara repeated uncertainly. If you'll allow me to help, Zach said. I have some experience with legal matters, and quite frankly, Mrs. Thompson, your situation may help me understand the larger picture I'm investigating. Clara knew she should be cautious about accepting help from a man she'd just met. But looking into Zachary Irwin's earnest face, she felt the first spark of hope she'd had in days. Thank you, she said simply. I'll accept any help that brings my children home. What Clara couldn't know then was how deeply her cause would soon entwine with Zach's own quest for justice, or how their alliance would challenge not only Judge Wilson's authority, but the corrupt system he represented. The next morning found Clara and Zach walking down Pine Avenue, Riverside's residential street where many of her laundry customers lived. Zach had suggested they begin gathering statements from respected members of the community who could vouch for Clara's character. Mrs. Becker is our first stop, Clara said, pointing to a neat white house with blue shutters. She watches Samuel and Lily when I have deliveries. Edith Becker, a kindly widow in her 60s, was outraged when she learned what had happened. Taken your children? On what grounds? She exclaimed. Those children are the best-behaved, sweetest little things in town. And you, Clara, working your fingers to the bone for them. It's a disgrace. Would you be willing to put that in writing, Mrs. Becker? Zach asked. And perhaps testify at the hearing. I most certainly will, the older woman declared. And I'll get the Ladies' Aid Society involved too. This isn't right. By midday, they had collected 5 written statements from Clara's customers and neighbors, all attesting to her devotion to her children and her industriousness. The Reverend Phillips from the Methodist Church promised to write a letter as well, having observed Clara's faithful attendance with her children every Sunday. People respect you more than you realized, Zach remarked as they walked back toward town. Clara smiled faintly. I've been so focused on just getting through each day that I hardly noticed. That's often how it is for those working hardest, Zach replied. Too busy doing what's right to stop and consider how others see you. They paused outside the general store, where a poster announcing the upcoming Founders' Day celebration caught Clara's eye. Henry and I brought the children to this every year, she said softly. Samuel was looking forward to the pie eating contest. Zach studied the poster. This says Judge Wilson will be giving a speech at the celebration. He always does, Clara replied. He considers himself the founding father of Riverside, though he only arrived after the mines were already established. Interesting, Zach murmured. Public perception matters greatly to men like Wilson. He turned to Clara with newfound intensity. We should use this. Use what? The celebration. The entire town will be there. If we've gathered enough support by then, it could be the perfect opportunity to demonstrate publicly that the community stands behind you. Clara looked uncertain. I don't want to make a spectacle, not a spectacle, Zach assured her. A demonstration of community support. Sometimes justice needs witnesses to ensure it's properly served. As they continued their walk, Clara studied Zach's profile. There was something in his determined expression that sparked her curiosity. "You mentioned investigating disappearing children," she said. "What exactly brought you to Riverside?" Zach was quiet for so long that Clara thought he might not answer. Finally, he spoke in a low voice. 3 years ago, I was working a case in Santa Fe involving a corrupt judge. Similar situation, children removed from homes on flimsy pretexts. I discovered that the judge was part of a network placing these children with wealthy families in the East who paid handsomely for adoptions without questions or paperwork. Clara gasped. "You mean selling children?" "Essentially, yes, though they called it placement fees." Zach's face hardened. "I was building a case, but before I could bring it to federal authorities, the judge was tipped off. He disappeared along with all the evidence." "And you think something similar is happening here?" Clara asked, horrified. "I don't know yet," Zach admitted. "But there are troubling similarities. When I tracked that judge's movements before he vanished, I found connections to several territorial officials, including correspondence with Judge Wilson. They had reached Clara's house, a modest structure at the edge of town with a large yard where sheets and clothing hung from multiple clotheslines. Zach surveyed the property with approval. "You've built something impressive here," he said. "A business that supports your family, space for your children to play safely. There's nothing unfit about this home." Clara felt tears threatening again. "Tell that to Judge Wilson." "I intend to," Zach said firmly, "and ensure he listens." Over the next week, Clara and Zach established a routine. Mornings were dedicated to Clara's laundry business, which couldn't stop despite her grief, with Zach unexpectedly offering his help with the heavier loads and deliveries. Afternoons were spent gathering more testimonials and researching legal precedents that might help Clara's case. Clara learned that Zach had been educated back east before the war, had fought for the Union, and afterward had joined the Pinkertons rather than return to his family's shipping business in Boston. "I wanted to make a difference," he explained as they sorted through legal books borrowed from Riverside's small library, "to ensure justice for those who couldn't fight for themselves." "Is that what I am?" Clara asked. "Someone who can't fight for herself?" Zach looked up, catching something in her tone. "Not at all," he said seriously. "You're one of the strongest people I've met, Mrs. Thompson, but even the strongest fighters need allies sometimes." Clara found herself watching Zach when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved confidently through papers, the slight furrow in his brow when he concentrated, the gentle way he spoke about her children, though he'd never met them. She caught herself wondering what Henry would think of this man helping his family, then felt guilty for the thought. 10 days after her children were taken, Clara received a brief letter from the Territorial Welfare Office. It contained a single cold paragraph indicating that Samuel and Lily were adjusting adequately to their temporary placement, and that visits would not be permitted before the hearing to prevent disruption to their new routine. Clara crumpled the letter in her fist, fighting back tears of frustration. "They won't even let me see them," she told Zach when he arrived that afternoon. "How can that be legal? They're my children." Zach's expression darkened as he read the flattened letter. "It's not right, but unfortunately, once the territory claims guardianship, they have broad powers." He looked up at Clara, determination in his eyes. "We need to know more about where they're being kept and who's making these decisions. I think it's time I visited Prescott." "I'm coming with you," Clara said immediately. Zach shook his head. "You need to maintain your business here. If you appear to abandon it, Wilson will only use that against you." "They're my children," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "I can't just sit here while you," Clara, Zach said. using her given name for the first time. The sound of it in his deep voice stopped her mid-sentence. "I promise I'll find them and make sure they're safe, but we have to be strategic. If you're seen in Prescott, trying to see them against court orders, it will harm your case." Clara knew he was right, but the thought of remaining in Riverside while her children were just 40 miles away was unbearable. Yet something in Zach's steady gaze reassured her. "3 days," she said finally. "I'll give you 3 days in Prescott, then I'm coming, court orders be damned." Zach nodded, recognizing the compromise for what it was. "I'll leave at dawn tomorrow. Is there anything you want me to tell them if I can get access?" Clara's composure finally broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Tell them Mama loves them more than anything in the world. Tell them I'm fighting to bring them home." Zach stepped forward hesitantly, then gently placed his hands on her shoulders. "I'll tell them exactly that. And Clara, we will bring them home. I swear it." The intensity in his voice made Clara look up. For a moment they stood too close, his hands warm through the fabric of her dress, her tear-stained face tilted toward his. Then Zach stepped back, clearing his throat. "I should go prepare for the journey," he said. "I'll come by before I leave in the morning." After he left, Clara stood in her empty kitchen, her hand unconsciously touching her shoulder where his hand had been. In the midst of her grief and worry, something new and unexpected was stirring feelings she had no right to acknowledge, not when her children were still missing, not when Henry had been gone barely 2 years. She pushed those thoughts firmly aside. Samuel and Lily were all that mattered now. The next 3 days were the longest of Clara's life. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra laundry to keep her mind occupied. In the evenings, she sat on her porch, watching the road from Prescott, waiting for any sign of Zach's return. On the 3rd day, just as Clara was preparing to pack for her own journey to Prescott, she spotted a familiar figure on horseback approaching her home. She ran to meet Zach as he dismounted, searching his face anxiously for news. "I found them," he said without preamble. "They're safe, Clara." Clara's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Thank God. Where are they? Who has them?" Zach guided her to the porch steps and sat beside her. "They're staying with a family named Collins. The husband works for the territorial government, a deputy to the commissioner who oversees the welfare office." "Did you see them? Speak to them?" Clara asked urgently. "I saw them," Zach confirmed. "I couldn't approach directly, but I observed them playing in the Collins yard. They appeared healthy, if somewhat subdued." Clara closed her eyes briefly, imagining her children in a stranger's home. "What else did you learn?" Zach's expression grew more serious. "I made inquiries around Prescott, posing as a businessman interested in territorial affairs. What I discovered is concerning. Judge Wilson is part of a close-knit group of officials who have been involved in dozens of similar cases across the territory. Similar to mine, yes. Widows or struggling families suddenly deemed unfit, their children placed with politically connected families, or sometimes sent east with minimal documentation." Zach hesitated. "I can't prove anything illegal yet, but the pattern suggests at minimum an abuse of power and possibly something more sinister." "Selling children," Clara said flatly, remembering their earlier conversation. "In some cases, perhaps," Zach acknowledged. "In others, it appears to be more about political favors and connections. The Collins family, for instance, has been trying to adopt for years without success." Clara's hands clenched into fists. "They're not adopting my children." "No, they're not," Zach agreed firmly. "The hearing is in 17 days. We now have 15 written testimonials supporting you, plus the Reverend's letter. I've also uncovered some irregularities in how your case was processed, No home inspection was conducted before the removal order, which violates territorial procedures. "Will it be enough?" Clara asked. "It should be in any fair court," Zach said. "But we need to be prepared for Wilson to fight back. Men like him don't surrender power easily." Clara straightened her shoulders, new determination flooding through her. "Then we'll fight harder." The next 2 weeks passed in a flurry of activity. Word of Clara's situation spread through Riverside, largely thanks to Mrs. Becker and the Ladies' Aid Society. Many townspeople who had barely acknowledged Clara before now stopped to express their support or offer to testify on her behalf. Not everyone was sympathetic, however. Mrs. Hargrove from the competing laundry business made pointed remarks about women who put business before motherhood. The banker's wife, who sat on the Territorial Welfare Committee, crossed the street to avoid speaking to Clara. And Judge Wilson's clerk delivered a thinly veiled warning that continued agitation might result in the children being placed permanently rather than temporarily. These threats only strengthened Clara's resolve. With Zach's help, she prepared meticulously for the hearing, organizing her testimonials, gathering evidence of her income and the children's school attendance, and practicing her own testimony until she could deliver it without breaking down. Throughout these preparations, Clara couldn't help noticing how seamlessly Zach had integrated himself into her life. He spent most days at her home, helping with the laundry in the mornings before turning to their casework. He repaired her sagging porch steps without being asked, and somehow convinced the butcher to extend her credit when money grew tight. More than once, Clara caught herself watching him with Samuel's wooden train set, which she'd kept on the mantel since the children were taken. His large hands would move the little engine gently along invisible tracks, a faraway look in his eyes. "Did you want children?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after a long day of preparation. "Before you joined the Pinkertons, I mean." Zach seemed startled by the personal question. After a moment he replied, "I never gave it much thought. My work didn't leave room for family." "And now," Clara pressed, surprising herself with her boldness. Zach's eyes met hers in the fading light. "Now I think there are things worth making room for." The charged silence that followed was broken by the arrival of Reverend Phillips, bringing a petition signed by his congregation supporting Clara's character. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of possibilities neither was ready to name. 3 days before the hearing, Zachary disappeared. He had mentioned going to meet a contact who might have information about Judge Wilson's financial dealings, but when he didn't return by nightfall, Clara grew worried. By the following morning, with no word from him, her concern turned to fear. She went to the sheriff's office, only to find Deputy Miller less than interested in a missing drifter. "Probably moved on, madam," he said dismissively. "These detective types don't stay in one place long." "He wouldn't leave without saying goodbye," Clara insisted. "Not with the hearing so close. Something's happened to him." The deputy sighed. "Look, Mrs. Thompson, I understand you've come to rely on Mr. Irwin, but men like that they help until they get bored, then they move on. Best accept it and focus on your hearing." Clara left the sheriff's office seething with frustration. She knew Zach wouldn't abandon her without a word. Something was wrong, and no one in authority seemed willing to help. Returning home, she found Mrs. Becker waiting on her porch with a plate of cookies and a concerned expression. "Any word from Mr. Irwin?" the older woman asked. Clara shook her head. "The sheriff thinks he simply left town." "Nonsense," Mrs. Becker declared. "That man looks at you like you hang the moon, Clara Thompson." "He wouldn't leave without a word." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Becker, really? Oh, don't play coy with me. I'm old, not blind." The widow patted Clara's hand. And I don't blame you one bit. He's a good man, whatever his past holds. I'm worried something's happened to him, Clara admitted. He mentioned meeting someone about Judge Wilson's business dealings. Mrs. Becker's expression grew serious. Judge Wilson has powerful friends. If your Mr. Irwin was poking into his affairs. Clara made a sudden decision. I need to find him. Will you help me? The next morning, Clara knocked on the door of the Silver Dollar Saloon before opening hours. The owner, Jack Murphy, had been surprisingly supportive of her case, having lost his own mother at a young age. Mrs. Thompson, he greeted her with surprise. Bit early for a social call. I need information, Mr. Murphy, Clara said directly, about where Judge Wilson conducts his private business in town. Murphy raised his eyebrows. That's dangerous territory, madam. I believe my friend Mr. Irwin may be in trouble for asking similar questions. Murphy studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Come in. Not out here where anyone can see. Inside the empty saloon, Murphy explained that Judge Wilson frequently met with certain business associates in the back room of Harris's Mercantile after hours. Old man Harris lets them use the place for their card games, Murphy said. But word is, cards ain't all they're playing at. Land deals, mining claims, and lately, something that's got them all acting secretive. Like arranging for children to be taken from their homes, Clara asked bluntly. Murphy looked uncomfortable. I wouldn't know about that, madam. But if your friend was asking questions about their business, they might have taken exception. Clara thanked him and left, her mind working quickly. The hearing was now just 2 days away. If Zach had been detained or worse because of his investigations, she needed to find him quickly. With Mrs. Becker's help, Clara spent the day discreetly inquiring about Judge Wilson's movements and any unusual activity around town. By evening, she had learned that a strange wagon had been seen leaving town in the middle of the night, headed toward an old mining camp in the hills that supposedly belonged to Wilson's brother-in-law. Clara knew she couldn't go to the authorities. The deputy had made his allegiance clear. Instead, she approached Bill Jenkins, a freight driver who had been one of her first customers when she started her laundry business. You want me to drive you up to Coyote Camp at night? He repeated incredulously when she explained her request. Mrs. Thompson, that's no place for a respectable woman. Mr. Jenkins, I believe someone I care about is being held there against his will, Clara said steadily. I'm not asking you to put yourself in danger. Just drive me there and wait while I investigate. Jenkins scratched his beard. The man who's been helping you with your kids. The detective fellow, Clara nodded. Well, I reckon I owe you for getting those wine stains out of my Sunday shirt when the missus said it was ruined. Jenkins sighed. Tomorrow night, I'll pick you up after dark. But I'm bringing my shotgun, and if there's any real trouble, we're leaving, you understand. Perfectly, Clara agreed, relief flooding through her. Thank you. The following night, Clara waited nervously on her back porch, dressed in her darkest clothing with a shawl covering her hair. When Jenkins arrived with his wagon, they set out on the rough road toward the hills without speaking. Coyote Camp had once been a bustling mining operation before the main vein played out. Now it consisted of a few abandoned shacks and the old foreman's cabin, which was reportedly used occasionally as a hunting lodge. Jenkins stopped the wagon in a stand of trees about a quarter-mile from the camp. There's a light in the cabin, he whispered. Someone's there. Clara peered through the darkness. Indeed, a faint glow came from the cabin's single window. More concerning was the horse tied outside. She recognized Judge Wilson's distinctive white-footed stallion. Wait here, she told Jenkins. If I'm not back in 20 minutes, go for help, Mrs. Thompson, please, she said firmly. I need to do this. Moving as quietly as she could, Clara approached the cabin from behind. As she drew closer, she heard voices, Judge Wilson's pompous tones unmistakable even through the walls. "The hearing will proceed as planned," he was saying. "Your interference has been noted, Irwin, but it changes nothing. People are starting to ask questions," came Zach's voice, sending a wave of relief through Clara. He was alive. Not just about the Thompson case, but all of them. "How many children have you and Commissioner Bentley processed through your little arrangement?" "We provide stable homes for children in need," Wilson replied coldly. "That some families express their gratitude with contributions to the Territorial Development Fund is merely good citizenship." "Is that what you call demanding payment for children? Good citizenship?" Zach's voice was thick with contempt. "The federal authorities might have a different name for it." "Federal authorities who will never hear about it," came a third voice Clara didn't recognize. "You'll be found tomorrow. Irwin, tragic victim of road agents. And Mrs. Thompson will lose her hearing, then likely move on once she accepts her children are better off in their new home." Clara's blood ran cold. They were planning to kill Zach and steal her children permanently. Anger overrode her fear as she crept to the cabin's single window. Peering inside, she saw Zach tied to a chair, his face bruised but his eyes defiant. Judge Wilson stood over him, while a third man whom Clara recognized as Commissioner Bentley from her one interaction with the welfare office paced nervously. "We should just do it now," Bentley was saying. "Why wait?" "Because his body needs to be found on the road, not here," Wilson said impatiently. "We'll move him before dawn." Clara knew she needed to act. Jenkins and his shotgun were too far away, and she had no weapon. Looking around desperately, she spotted a rusty shovel leaning against the cabin. It wasn't much, but it might provide enough distraction. Taking a deep breath, Clara grabbed the shovel and slammed it against the cabin's tin roof as hard as she could. The resulting clang echoed through the night like a gunshot. Inside, she heard cursing and confusion. Through the window, she saw Bentley draw a pistol while Wilson moved toward the door. Staying low, Clara circled to the front of the cabin and waited beside the door, shovel raised. When Wilson stepped outside, peering into the darkness, Clara swung the shovel with all her strength. It connected with a satisfying thud, and the judge crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Bentley's voice came from inside. "Wilson, what is it?" Clara pressed herself against the wall beside the door, heart pounding. When Bentley appeared in the doorway, his pistol extended, she swung again. This time she caught only his arm, but it was enough to send the gun flying as he yelped in pain. "Clara, run!" Zach shouted from inside. But Clara had come too far to run now. As Bentley lunged for his fallen gun, she kicked it away and raised the shovel threateningly. "Touch that gun and I'll split your skull open," she said with a calm she didn't feel. Bentley froze, clutching his injured arm. "Mrs. Thompson, this is madness. You're only making things worse for yourself. Untie Mr. Irwin," Clara demanded. "Now." "You can't possibly think you'll get away with assaulting territorial officials," Bentley blustered, but there was fear in his eyes now. "I think I just caught those officials planning a murder," Clara replied steadily. "Untie him, or I'll knock you unconscious like your friend here and do it myself." Bentley hesitated, then moved back into the cabin slowly. Clara followed, keeping the shovel raised. Inside, Zach watched her with a mixture of admiration and concern as Bentley fumbled with the ropes binding him. "Clara, what are you doing here?" Zach asked as his hands came free. "Saving you, apparently," she replied, not taking her eyes off Bentley. "Jenkins is waiting with his wagon. We need to go." Zach quickly bound Bentley with the same ropes, gagging him with a handkerchief. Outside, he secured the still unconscious Judge Wilson similarly. "They'll be found eventually," he told Clara as they hurried toward Jenkins' waiting wagon. "But this gives us time to get back to town and contact the federal marshal I've been corresponding with. I've been gathering evidence for weeks' records of donations coinciding with child removals, statements from families who were approached about special adoptions." "Will it be enough?" Clara asked as they reached the wagon, Jenkins gaping at their disheveled appearance. "It will be now that we caught them discussing murder and kidnapping," Zach said grimly. "But we need to move quickly. The hearing is tomorrow, and we need to make sure it happens on our terms." The ride back to Riverside was tense, with Jenkins demanding explanations and Zach filling in the details of his capture and detention. He had been ambushed after meeting a clerk from the land office who had agreed to share records of unusual property transactions involving Judge Wilson. "They've been running this scheme for at least 3 years, Zach explained. "Taking children from vulnerable families, placing them with wealthy or politically connected people in exchange for donations or favors. Some children were even sent to families back east who paid substantial sums for quick, quiet adoptions." "And my children?" Clara asked, fear clutching at her heart. "The Collins family, they're not part of it," Zach assured her. "At least not knowingly. They were told Samuel and Lily needed emergency placement because of abuse. They're decent people who have been manipulated." Dawn was breaking as they reached Riverside. Zach directed Jenkins to take them straight to the telegraph office, where he sent an urgent message to Federal Marshal James Cooper in Tucson, describing the situation and requesting immediate intervention. "Now we prepare for the hearing," Zach said as they left the telegraph office. "It's still scheduled for 10 o'clock. Wilson and Bentley won't be there, but the court clerk will likely proceed rather than admit anything is amiss." "But without a judge," Clara began. "Justice of the peace Miller can preside in Wilson's absence," Zach explained. "He's not part of their scheme, just a man who follows orders without questioning them too closely. With the right pressure and public witnesses, he'll have to rule fairly." As they walked through the awakening town, Clara suddenly realized she was still carrying the shovel she'd used to subdue Judge Wilson. She stared at it, then at Zach's bruised face, and absurdly began to laugh. "Clara," Zach asked, concerned. I hit a territorial judge with a shovel," she gasped between fits of laughter that verged on hysteria. "What kind of mother does that make me?" Zach gently took the shovel from her hands. "A fierce one," he said softly, "the kind any child would be lucky to have fighting for them." His words sobered her immediately. "Will it be enough, Zach? Will I get them back today?" "Yes," he said with quiet certainty. "One way or another, your children are coming home today." By 9:30 that morning, the Riverside courthouse was filled to capacity. Word had spread quickly about Judge Wilson's mysterious absence and the unusual circumstances of the hearing. Clara sat at the front, dressed in her best blue dress, her hair neatly pinned. Zach, having cleaned up his appearance as best he could, sat beside her, his bruises impossible to disguise but his expression calmly determined. At precisely 10 o'clock, Justice Miller entered, looking distinctly uncomfortable at the packed room and the whispers that followed him. "In the absence of Judge Wilson, who has been called away on urgent territorial business," Miller began hesitantly, "I will preside over the matter of the guardianship of Samuel and Lily Thompson." A murmur ran through the crowd at this obvious falsehood. Everyone knew Wilson hadn't been seen since yesterday. "Before we begin," Miller continued, "I should note that Commissioner Bentley has recommended proceeding with permanent placement of the children with their current guardians, the Collins family of Prescott." Clara felt her heart sink, but Zach squeezed her hand reassuringly as he stood. "Your Honor, if I may," he said clearly. "I am Zachary Irwin, former Pinkerton agent and currently a private investigator. I've been assisting Mrs. Thompson with her case and have evidence that demands immediate attention." Miller frowned. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Irwin. We're here to determine the children's best interests, not to entertain outside investigations." "With respect, sir, when the children's best interests have been compromised by corruption, the court must hear the evidence," Zach replied firmly. "Judge Wilson and Commissioner Bentley are not on territorial business. They're currently being held by federal authorities on suspicion of extortion, kidnapping, and conspiracy." The courtroom erupted in shocked exclamations. Miller banged his gavel repeatedly, his face paling. "This is outrageous. I'll have you removed. Federal Marshal Cooper will be arriving from Tucson by noon," Zach continued calmly over the commotion. "He brings warrants based on evidence I've gathered over several months, showing that Wilson, Bentley, and others have been systematically removing children from homes on false pretenses, then placing them with families who make substantial donations to certain territorial funds." "These are serious accusations," Miller said, visibly shaken. "But they don't change the facts of Mrs. Thompson's case." "They change everything about her case," Zach countered. "The removal of her children was not based on any legitimate investigation or concern for their welfare. It was part of a pattern of targeting vulnerable families, particularly widows, whose property or situations were of interest to certain parties." At this point, Reverend Phillips stood from his seat in the gallery. "Your Honor, if I may speak as a character witness for Mrs. Thompson." Miller nodded weakly, seemingly grateful for the interruption. For the next hour, a parade of witnesses testified to Clara's character, her children's well-being, and her capabilities as a mother. Mrs. Becker described how Samuel and Lily were always clean, well-fed, and polite under Clara's care. The schoolteacher, Miss Winters, testified that despite occasional absences, both children were bright students who clearly came from a loving home. Throughout the testimony, Clara sat straight-backed and dignified, though tears sometimes glistened in her eyes. Zach remained beside her, his steady presence giving her strength. Finally, it was Zach's turn to present his evidence. He laid out documents showing the pattern of child removals across the territory, the suspicious financial transactions that followed, and statements from officials who had been pressured to cooperate with Wilson's welfare initiatives. "Your Honor," he concluded, "Mrs. Thompson's children were taken not because she was an unfit mother, but because she represented an opportunity for profit. She owns her home outright, runs a successful business, and has no male protector to intervene. She was the perfect target for their scheme." Miller looked increasingly disturbed as the evidence mounted. "Mr. Irwin, these matters will need to be investigated thoroughly by proper authorities." "Agreed," Zach said. "But in the meantime, there is no legal or moral justification for keeping Samuel and Lily Thompson from their mother. I ask the court to order their immediate return." Miller hesitated, clearly weighing his options. The courtroom had grown so silent that Clara could hear the ticking of the wall clock. "Mrs. Thompson," Miller said finally, "would you please approach?" Clara stood, her legs shaking slightly, and moved before the judge's bench. "You have impressive advocates," Miller observed, "but I need to hear from you directly. Why should I return your children today, rather than waiting for these serious allegations to be properly investigated?" Clara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Your Honor, I've spent every day since my husband died working to provide my children with a secure home, good food, and proper education. I've never neglected them, never mistreated them, never placed anything above their welfare." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. They were taken without warning or explanation while I was working to support them. For nearly a month, I've been allowed no contact, no assurance of their well-being beyond cold official letters. What mother could endure such separation without fighting with every breath to reunite her family? Clara gestured toward the crowded courtroom. These people know me. They know my children. They know the truth of our lives together. The only evidence against me was manufactured by men who saw us as an opportunity for profit. I ask you, not as a judge but as a human being, would you keep a mother from her children based on such a foundation? Miller's gaze moved from Clara to the assembled townspeople, many of whom were nodding in agreement with her words. Finally, he sighed heavily. In light of the testimony presented and pending further investigation of the troubling allegations against certain territorial officials, I hereby order that Samuel and Lily Thompson be returned to the custody of their mother, Clara Thompson, effective immediately. He banged his gavel decisively. This court will issue the necessary documents for their transport from Prescott today. Clara swayed slightly, overcome with emotion. Behind her, the courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. As she turned, her eyes sought Zach, finding him watching her with undisguised admiration. "Thank you," she mouthed, unable to speak aloud. He simply nodded, his eyes saying what words could not yet express. Later that afternoon, as Clara prepared her home for Samuel and Lily's return, airing bedrooms, baking their favorite cookies, setting out the toys they'd missed, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Zach standing on her porch, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Marshal Cooper arrived," he said without preamble. "Wilson and Bentley are in custody along with 2 other officials from Prescott. There will be a federal investigation." "Good," Clara said firmly. "They deserve whatever punishment comes." Zach nodded. "The Collins family has been informed of the situation. They're bringing Samuel and Lily to Riverside themselves. Apparently they've grown fond of the children but are horrified by the circumstances. They should arrive by evening." Clara's heart leapt at this news. So soon? Oh, thank God. She impulsively grabbed Zach's hands. "I can never repay you for what you've done." "You already have," he said quietly. "Watching you fight for your family with such courage, it's been a privilege, Clara." Something in his tone made her study his face more closely. "You're leaving," she realized. Zach hesitated. "Marshal Cooper has asked me to help with the broader investigation. There may be similar operations in other territories." "I see," Clara said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course, your work is important." "It is," Zach agreed. "But so is this." He gestured between them. "What's happened here, between us, I don't want to presume, but I've come to care for you, Clara. More than I should, perhaps, given the circumstances." Clara felt her cheeks warm. "I've come to care for you too, Zach, more than I expected." "I'll need to travel with Cooper for a time," Zach said. "To finish what we've started, make sure all the children taken by Wilson's scheme are properly accounted for. But when it's done, if you're willing, I'd like to come back." "To Riverside?" Clara asked. "To you," he clarified. "To see if what we've begun here might grow into something more in time." "If that's something you could consider." Clara thought of Henry, of the grief she'd carried since his death, of the unexpected feelings that had blossomed during these difficult weeks with Zach. She thought of her children, who would soon be home, who deserved happiness and stability. "I would like that," she said softly. "Very much." Zach's smile transformed his face, erasing the worry and tension of recent days. Gently, he raised her hand to his lips. "Then I'll come back, Clara Thompson. You have my word." As the sun set over Riverside that evening, Clara stood on the road at the edge of town, watching for the approaching carriage that would bring her children home. Beside her, Zach waited quietly, having delayed his departure to witness this reunion. When at last the carriage appeared on the horizon, Clara could scarcely breathe. As it drew closer, she saw two small faces pressed against the window, and then the carriage had barely stopped before Samuel and Lily were tumbling out, running toward her with cries of "Mama! Mama!" Clara fell to her knees, gathering her children into her arms, breathing in their familiar scent, feeling their small bodies pressed against hers. Tears flowed freely down her face as she held them, murmuring words of love and reassurance. "We missed you so much, Mama," Samuel said, his arms tight around her neck. "The other family was nice," Lily added earnestly, "but they weren't you." "I missed you more than words can say," Clara told them, pulling back to look at their beloved faces. "And I promise we'll never be separated again." It was only then that the children noticed Zach standing nearby, watching their reunion with suspiciously bright eyes. "Who's that, Mama?" Samuel asked. Clara held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Zach stepped forward to take it. "This is Mr. Irwin," she said. "He helped bring you home." Zach knelt down to their level. "It's a pleasure to meet you both," he said seriously. "Your mother has told me so much about you." Lily studied him solemnly. "Did you help catch the bad men who took us away?" "I did," Zach confirmed. "Along with your very brave mother." Samuel looked between them curiously. "Are you going to stay?" Zach exchanged a glance with Clara before answering. "Not right away. I have some important work to finish first. But with your mother's permission, I hope to come back and get to know you all better." "He will come back," Clara said with quiet certainty. "And when he does, we'll all have time to become better acquainted." As they walked together toward home, Clara holding her children's hands, Zach carrying their small bags, Clara felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced since Henry's death. Her family was whole again, different but unbroken. Later, after the children were asleep in their own beds at last, Clara and Zach stood on her porch in the moonlight. "I leave in the morning," he said reluctantly. "I know." Clara stepped closer to him. "But you'll come back." "Nothing could keep me away," he promised. "What we've found here, it's rare, Clara, worth fighting for just as your children were." "Then we'll be waiting," she said simply. "All of us." Zach raised a hand to her cheek, his touch gentle. "May I write to you?" "I'd be disappointed if you didn't," Clara replied with a smile. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Zach lowered his head. Their lips met in a kiss that held both promise and farewell, sweet and brief but filled with possibility. When they parted, Clara whispered, "Come home to us, Zachary Irwin." "I will," he vowed. "Home to stay." 3 months later, as autumn painted the Arizona countryside in golds and reds, Clara stood once again at the edge of town, watching for an approaching rider. Samuel and Lily fidgeted beside her, excited after weeks of receiving letters addressed not just to their mother, but to them as well, letters filled with stories of justice being done, children being reunited with families, and the writer's growing anticipation of returning to Riverside. When at last Zach appeared on the horizon, the children could barely contain themselves. Clara watched, her heart full, as he dismounted and knelt to receive their enthusiastic greetings. When he finally stood and approached her, his eyes held everything she'd been hoping to see. "Welcome home," she said softly. Zach took her hands in his. "I've been thinking about that word all the way from Tucson. Home. I've never really had one until now." As the four of them walked back toward town together, Clara thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment, the grief, the struggle, the fear, and finally, unexpectedly, the joy. Her children were safe, justice had been served, and beside her walked a man who had fought for her family as fiercely as she had. "What happens now?" she asked him quietly while the children ran ahead. Zach smiled, his hand finding hers. Now we build something new together, if you'll have me." Clara's answer was in her eyes, in her smile, in the way she leaned into his side as they walked toward home, and in the future that stretched before them, bright with promise and possibility.